Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special bonus episode of Kotaku Split Screen. My name is Jason Schreier, news editor at Kotaku.com, and I am joined, as always, by Kirk Hamilton, editor-at-large of Kotaku.com. Hello, Kirk.
Hello, everybody. Hello.
And we are also joined by the man of the month, the director of God of War, longtime employee of Sony Santa Monica, Corey Barlog.
Fantastic.
Hello, Corey. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Not to be confused with Corey Balrog, your alter
yes.
ego who defeated Gandalf in the Mines of Moria.
Right.
I mean, did he defeat Gandalf, though? I think Gandalf ultimately defeated him.
Right, but he took him down, and Gandalf had to say,
Yes.
"Fly, you fools."
Right.
How often do you go up to people and say, "Fly, you fools"?
I say you shall not pass.
You shall not pass.
Oh,
Corey,
all right.
thank you so much for being here. I should warn everybody that we are going to be getting full on into spoilers of God of the War from the get-go.
Yep.
So if you have not finished God of War, turn this shit off and go.
This is not the cast you're looking for.
Yeah, listen to something else. Listen to our previous episode of Kotaku Split Screen or many others that do not
I mean, if
involve
you haven't finished God of
spoilers.
War and you don't care about spoilers, go ahead and listen to this. I encourage
fair.
all
That's
those
true.
people to stick around.
That's true.
Yeah.
We'll just ruin Infinity War for you.
That is
Yes,
fair.
exactly.
But no, we are not going to ruin it.
No, we're not.
We
I
are
can't
not
do it
going to
anyway
talk
because
about
I haven't
Infinity
seen
War.
it, so it's good.
Yeah, good. Okay. But we are going to talk about the fact that that Atreus is Loki and all the other delicious spoilers that we will get into in depth here. First of all, Corey, what would you say was the most challenging thing about making this game, this critically acclaimed God of War game that you have come up with?
Wow. I think the length of the process, the having the endurance to survive for 5 years and maintain energy. Right, there's so many aspects to say that any one individual one was the hardest. I think they were all so hard. We had so many things stacked up against us. You know, the new engine, new team. I lost a year in pre-production by inheriting the team really early. But I think in ways that made us better, we had to be more inventive and quicker on our feet.
What do you mean by lost a year in pre-production?
I was expecting like a 2-year pre-production cycle, but we had actually inherited the team a year early. So I needed to quickly recoup and make sure that I had something to give people. And
that seems like it's such a common problem in AAA development,
Yeah.
to feed the beast, the idea that you have all these people and you need to come up with work for them.
Yes. Yeah. And that is every project I've ever worked on has that same problem of, don't worry, we swear in the next one it's going to be better. We're going to plan better. And it never happens.
Never happened. And
We're terrible.
People always wonder, like, why wasn't this decision made better earlier? And it's because you have to make a decision as quickly as possible to give to people so people can actually work. And then you can't reverse that decision because otherwise you're throwing out work.
But that I think the cool thing about Santa Monica is the fact that we are willing to go back on some of those decisions, to re-examine something if it's not working. I've noticed that with a lot of the first-party groups that we've talked to, is that everybody is willing to make that decision that, is perhaps seemingly on the surface not wise, to say, let's throw this entire thing out we spent 3 years working on because we can make it better.
Is that why it took 5 years?
Oh, it just took 5 years because the game is so damn big. But we worked on that first level for years and years, almost the duration of the project. The first level was worked on, but at the tail end, the artist went through and said, "I'm gonna clean this up a little bit." But really, they didn't clean it up. They totally redid the art on the entire first level and made the producers freak out.
I have a question. I have a scope
Yes.
question. So did you guys always know that the scope of this game would be primarily concerned with Baldur and Freya and that Odin would sort of remain at the fringes? Like, was there a version of this game where you're like, oh, you fight Thor and you fight Odin? Since I was kind of thinking going in that I might do that, but then toward the end I was like, oh, okay, I get it. The scope of this game is this. Did you have different scopes in mind when you were starting out?
Yeah, I mean, the first draft that we wrote was more focused on the well-known pop culture characters. And I realized after the draft was finished, I was reading it, and I said, no, I'm making the second game. Like I'm focusing not on the relationship between Kratos and Atreus, but we're trying to involve too many characters. We're sort of playing to, they might not know who these characters are. And the reality is, the more mature decision we needed to make was we don't need that, right? We need less characters, and we need to really focus on the growth of the two core characters and then how they interact with other characters there. So they became more interesting to say that the presence of Odin was this omnipresent sort of concept, and that he had his fingers in everything, because that is who this character is. And the idea of Thor in the early script, you'd almost see the remnants of him. So every time you went to different places, you'd see, oh, he had been here, right? And it was very powerful, that kind of imagery. And we said, all right, well, we don't really want to go there because that is definitely something we want to tell later. So focusing more on the idea that, we want to set up your conflict a little bit, and family is such a core theme, and everybody you interact with is the family relationship. So that the fact that Thor's sons have a very complicated relationship with their father, the fact that Freya has an extremely complicated relationship with her son, these are all the mirrors that reflect back to Kratos and Atreus and the journey that they're on.
So weren't you worried that showing that Odin had his fingers in everything, but not actually showing Odin would be like almost like a tease to people?
Totally.
Okay, so that's what you wanted.
But yeah, but that's what I wanted. Like, some of the most compelling series to me don't always do everything in the first, right? They set a lot of stuff up so that the power of the characters and the interactions on the second or third really resonates strongly.
So how much of the future game plan for this do you have mapped out in your head?
5 games.
Wow.
So that's 25 years of your life?
I know, it's ridiculous.
Is that what you're prepared for?
No. I want to figure out how to make these things faster, man. Because
how can anyone make these things faster?
I think this one, a big portion of the 5 years was we had to start from scratch, right? That we had a core engine, but we really redid a lot of stuff. And the previous God of War games, when we went from God of War 1 to God of War 2, the core engine was there. Right. And aside from the fact that the combat design team told me, we're just going to do a little rewrite of the combat engine. Don't worry. In a couple of months, we'll be back online. A year later, we finally built our first character on God of War 2. It was the most stressful time ever because they kept saying, just another month. It's like doing construction in your house. It's just, don't worry, it's another week. Don't worry, another week. It's just, So in this one, everything really needed to be redone, right? Because we just had torn the engine apart in so many different ways that when we finally brought the team together, everybody realized, okay, this is not where it needs to be. So even when you see E3 2016, the rendering engine wasn't there, the lighting engine was half there, the atmospherics engine was half there, the sort of core mechanics were there, but a lot of the way we were streaming and loading and everything was still getting worked out and figured out how we were going to get it logistically to work. We knew what we wanted, we just didn't know technologically how we were going to get it in the right order.
So how do you, as the director, stop your team from doing the same thing when you're working on the next God of War game? Like, how do you say, no, you cannot mess around with the combat engine. We need to do this in 2 years. We need to do this in a reasonable time frame.
They're not going to listen to me on that one. Yeah, that's a very difficult thing to do, right? Because I feel like in each time we have this group of people who are all perfectionists, and they aspire towards making whatever they're doing better. Literally, we were at the wrap party on Friday, right? We launched the game the day before. We're at the wrap party, and the thing that was echoed over and over again when I was running into people was, yeah, I got some ideas of how we can make this better. I got some ideas of how we can go. I'd like to go back in and redo all of this stuff. They're supposed to be
make the text bigger.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, we own that one. That's on me. I'm going to own the text thing on that one. But you know what's interesting about that? I was we did not get any feedback during all of our playtests about that.
Was everyone just sitting with monitors in front of them?
That was the highlight of we're learning all the time, and we're taking in so many pieces of input as we're studying how people play the game, the reactions to it, and even after the game is out, we're seeing like, wow, our methodology for testing had a blind spot, and that blind spot, even when we sent kits home with people, was still not illuminated. And it's fantastic that the community is patient with us as we're like, okay, we need to react to this. We need to figure out the best way to solve this problem. But it was definitely one of those, we were focused on so many pieces of the game that it just never came up. And immediately, the first time somebody said it, I was like, oh, we never talked about this. We never talked about the size. And it's like when I don't really look at the subtitles at all. Like even when I have them on, I know what they're saying, so I'm not really paying attention to that. And then I'm the worst.
Well, it's also the menus. It's not just the subtitles.
Yeah.
It's
so the menus, subtitles, like all of that. And the part of it was our menus came online like literally in the last 8 weeks.
That doesn't shock me.
Like it was definitely.
So you didn't have any menus until the last 8 weeks.
We did. It just wasn't the final versions of it. So we had really stand-in rough stuff to get the structure and the skeleton. But really getting it all in is that it is the adage of any creative thing. It looks terrible. It is an ugly baby until the very last second, and then all of a sudden, there it is. Everything's there in a span of like 2 or 3 weeks, and you get very little time at that point to react to it. Because, as I was saying, everything was being done sort of at the same time throughout the duration of the project. The engine itself, the mechanics, the level design, that was the most maddening part of the beginning, was we're trying to design levels, but we're also prototyping the mechanics that are going to drive and be the building blocks for these levels. So it's like the level designers are yelling at me going, I don't understand how you want me to design a level. We don't have any mechanics. And the mechanics guys are like, we don't have any time. We have to start doing these things. And they're like, but we don't have any tools, right?
So it sounds super chill. This doesn't sound stressful at all.
This all raises the question, why do you make video games?
Right. Because we are masochists. We hate ourselves.
So yeah, how does that something... I assume that you guys have UI designers. Were the UI designers just not able to work on the menus and the text until the last 8 weeks?
Or because we hadn't finalized all the systems. We hadn't finalized all the upgrading. It's the first game we've ever done something as ambitious as the sort of crafting and upgrade system. Previous games, we had a very fixed, very linear, very, very controlled upgrade system that is easier to wrap your head around earlier in the game. But now that the combat system is completely new, all the things you're going to get, we're still getting kind of figured out and designed and prototyped and tested and then thrown out and then started over. So much of that stuff so that the UI team is waiting for inputs, like tell us what this is going to be, but we're like, we're still figuring that out, right? And we're still locking that down. And, we've got these 4,000 pieces, right? But it's 4,000 pieces of a system that we've never designed before. And we're looking at so many different games of like, okay, how do they solve that problem? And how are we wrapping our heads around this? And it was really Jeet Shroff, our lead gameplay programmer, who kind of grabbed this multi-headed Hydra and, wrangled it in the last sort of stretch. He had the most, I think...
The only Hydra involved in this God of War.
Right. The only Hydra was the UI and the crafting and upgrade system.
Yeah. So speaking of previous God of War games, one of the things we were very curious about is that previous God of War games obviously had a very different tone, but also they all had sex mini games, sex cutscenes, something involving sex. It felt like it was on the checklist of what makes a God of War game. It's like you got Kratos, you got blades, you got sex. What made you guys decide to ditch that this time around?
Dave had an initial pitch in the first God of War.
Dave Jaffe.
Dave Jaffe, yeah, sorry. Dave Jaffe, the creator of this franchise. Really, to me, the sort of Rosetta Stone of all of this franchise. He is the beginning. He is the origin of all of this. And literally, I have a job because of that guy. And his original pitch was, Clash of the Titans meets Heavy Metal Magazine, which had, this sense of there was mature content inside of this game as well as, the fantastic elements. And for me, in the first game, it really fit to help define his character. Those things fit because it was a way for him to forget. He drank and he lost himself in the embrace of others, right? And that was his way of trying to deaden sort of an internal pain. I feel, and I can take responsibility for this because I myself directed the second game and then did the layout and the sort of writing of the third, is that we perhaps believed what you had just said, which was it was a checklist, and then we were like, oh well, we must include this, right? And it was showing my infancy as a director to not really, I think, stand back and look at it and go like, is this furthering the character or is this sort of playing to the audience, right?
Gratuitous.
And I wouldn't necessarily say that we were like I think in a bad way sort of playing to it, but it was this sort of like, okay, everything about what we did on the God of War games following the first one was this sense of topping ourselves, right? Topping ourselves with scale, topping ourselves with whatever the last game had done. And I think for me, I needed to grow as a director to understand I need to look at this as what is the purpose of each of these moments, right? And that was the examination we did at the beginning of this project, was every single thing had to validate its existence in the game for why it is there, for what is it doing for the character, what is it doing for the world. And, we listed everything off. Like we had an entire room filled with like every aspect of the game broken down on a quick bullet point, down to the double jump and the mini game scenes, the concept of using the Simon Says mechanic, every one of those things. And bullet point one by one, we said why, defend it. Like tell why it's good, tell what it does, and then say, is there a way we can include it and then elevate it, right? Instead of just including it, it's like, how can we make it better? And for me, it didn't fit with the character journey, right? It was, to me, never needing to be something that had to be part of every game, but it only benefits us, and I think the game, if it furthers the character, right? And for Kratos, where he is in this part of his journey is in this stumbling through figuring out what the right decisions are, right? And he's trying to model a decent behavior, even though he's not really had any decent behavior modeled for him in his life.
There's a sort of like narratively and the way that this game the way that this full story sort of functioned to me anyways playing it almost acts like a refutation or a reckoning with some of the stuff from those first games. Like Kratos, it's not just the sex. He does like horrible stuff. Like I had forgotten some of the stuff he does in God of War 3, like throwing a woman into gears and like dragging corpses around. Like he really sucks. And then this game, especially by the end, it's sort of dealing with that. And it feels like the game is saying like, through the character of Kratos, that's not me anymore. That was bad. Do you view that, like, does that feel true to you on a meta level, that you're sort of looking back at that stuff and saying, we've moved past this? This is no longer what God of War is?
In a way, yeah. I think I look at it as we've always compared, or at least recently, making strong comparisons to the development of the early games as kind of our college years, right? That kind of, we're taking on the world, we're proving ourselves to the rest of the development community that, hey, look, we have something to say, right? But for me, I think we are older. We are the same people. We are owning our past, just the way that Kratos is owning his past. There is that moment when he finds, spoiler, Blades of Chaos, and he goes back to the house, and his confrontation with Athena is that moment. I think for me, it rings true in the sense that he owns who he is. He says he's a monster, the thing he's denied for so long, that he basically acknowledges he's a monster, but he's a monster that's not in control of anybody else, right? This idea that he's making decisions for himself, and he's gonna make mistakes, he's gonna fall, he's gonna stumble, and that is part of the human journey, the human side that he's lost so long ago.
That was we just wrote about the Blades of Chaos scene, which is a great scene. I want to ask about just sort of your decision making process, like when to put those into the game, maybe a little later. But in relation to what we're talking about, there's this conflict that you're kind of talking about, the conflict too, where the Blades of Chaos are sort of this metaphor for him, reckoning with his past, but then also they're like fucking awesome, and it just is awesome to use them. And so it's kind of like I felt more on the side of like, this is great, I'm psyched to have these dope weapons back in the game, rather than, oh, now I feel the weight of Kratos' sins or something. How do you approach that, I guess, that conflict, like the conflict between those two things?
Well, it's definitely, I think, a felt, perhaps, but not consciously processed, if you will, so that the surface level is the building of the anticipation and the tension, because it all begins with a very high-stakes, tragic event of Kratos seeing his son go into, sort of the rage mode and losing his consciousness, right? And that is basically, he has to stare at like the worst part of himself is manifested in his child, and it nearly kills him. And that level of responsibility brings forth this journey that he is heading back to the house, right? He has to pull out something from his past that represents servitude and bad decision making.
But like to players, it represents, fuck yes, this really is God of War. This rules. So like, how did you think about that? Like, did you struggle with that at all? Because there's totally a conflict there, even though it's
but that conflict
scene.
Is actually the important thing, is because it's sort of the subversive emotional connection with the audience that I know that they're going to have that, oh, finally, right? We put it in that place in the game because that was the place I had seen most players give up on the fact that it was going to be in the game. So you had sort of let it go, and you were like, I'm embracing the axe, everything's great. And then that ride back to the house is that, oh, are they doing that? No. Yeah. No, are they doing that?
Right, yes,
wait,
definitely.
Is that Athena? What? No.
Very good.
No.
And by the way, when he said I'm going home, I thought you were going to take us back to Greece, and I was like, holy shit.
Oh, wow. Way. That's a serious walk,
that would be, that would be quite a game.
That is a journey.
A massive world. That's right. All of Greece, a hub world.
700-hour game.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I don't think we would ever finish the game if we did that.
Another 5 years. This is a good segue into a question that I had for you, which is, I'm curious, Corey, from your perspective, what is the message that you're trying to convey in God of War? Like, what are you trying to say about rage and violence and parenthood in this game?
Well, rage, violence, parenthood, and I also think sort of true self-examination, right? Kratos has spent a good portion, in fact, all of his time, I would say, from God of War 1 all the way up to the last game that we had done, blaming other people. He spends time blaming other people. He asks, instead of working through pain and problems, he asks for people to erase the pain and the problems. He doesn't want to work through the problem. He wants to blame and sort of run away, right? And I think with this game, there's a part of me that knows investing 5 years into something, I better have a message, and a message that I would love for my son to actually see, right? A message that would take away, that he could take away, in this idea that there is no negativity to the idea of the single person having both strength and vulnerability. They do not cancel each other out. They are not juxtaposed ideas. That you are a complete human when you experience the range of human emotions. When you are just rage, right? You are only a fraction of what the experience that we need to have. And while he embodied this sort of power fantasy of rage, it was his downfall. It was his rock bottom to kind of lose the tiny bit of humanity that he had, and just continue to run further away from it, right? And I think for this game, it was truly about showing we are all not so far gone that we cannot make the journey towards some right decisions, right? No matter how many times we fail and we fall along that journey. And that's, from a dramatic standpoint, that's the interesting thing, is not, hey, this character succeeded. It was, wow, this person who I look up to failed over and over and over again, but they got back up, right? They struggled. And his failures are emotional failures. His failures are availability, right? I want to just say, good job, son. But that's hard, right? That's almost of like my grandfather's generation and a little bit of my father's generation, of the ability to actually be able to emotionally connect with others. It models a behavior for us, which then we pass on, right? And like I think it's an important thing for everyone to learn, is that you are strong because you have emotions.
Do you think at the end of the game, when you mentioned right decisions, do you think at the end of the game when Kratos decides to kill Baldur in front of Freya in order to save Freya, do you think he made the right decision there?
He didn't save Freya. He wasn't doing it to save Freya. Had nothing to do with her.
Well, it prevented him from killing Freya.
It prevented him, but the what he was doing there was he was showing his son the message that was getting sent throughout the game. Is this what being a god is? Children killing their parents. Parents fearing or killing their children. And he needed his son to see that that was not the behavior he wanted modeled, right? That it wasn't about saving Freya. You know, Freya was making a decision that she was going to make, but he was making a decision to show his son that don't be sorry, be better, had an awkward way of presenting in the beginning, but we must be better is his way of understanding the words he said to his son, right? That it came all the way back around to say that we have to be better. Baldur is not better, right? Baldur is a broken man, right? He is, the spell basically took away his ability to feel, which then brought him down to this slow descent into madness, right? A descent that is somewhat reflective of what Kratos went through as well, because Freya is going through the same thing. Her sort of origin story is this moment at the end, this sort of realization that she has now the forked path, the dark path, and sort of the path of forgiveness. And she's going to make her choice at that point. Kratos has been faced with that same thing, right? And I think it was very, very important at that moment for Kratos to, through things that he's familiar with, through things that the audience is familiar with, make a choice, but make a choice that he views as being better. Now, is it better? I don't know. I think that is one of the things that you have to look at and see, how does that affect the rest of the world? Because in the previous games, Kratos had very selfish motives for everything he did. He was extremely self-centered on everything that he did, and what he did accidentally, tangentially, was benefit humanity. He freed them from the tyrannical sort of polytheistic beliefs. He cut the threads of fate so that mankind's sort of fates was determined by themselves. He gave hope to mankind because he was doing a selfish thing. Now, he's doing something that is not selfish. He's trying to do something where he's thinking about another person when he's making that decision, and it actually begins the long winter that precedes the end of the world.
I definitely struggle with the decision at the end of the game and like totally like making sense of it. But I like that. I guess you say that it isn't necessarily the right decision. Like,
Right.
Just because it doesn't like I'm like, okay, so Freya wanted to die and Baldur wanted to kill her, but then Kratos took that choice away from her by killing Baldur to model good behavior to his son, but he kills the dude. Like, it is all kind of confusing. But I guess I'm trying to think of other.
But why did Freya want to die? In your mind, when you think of that, why did Freya want to die?
I guess because she was punishing herself for what she viewed as a mistake that she made with her son. Probably.
It's interesting.
I'm glad we're getting into a quiz here.
Right.
Like, this is
But
final exam number one.
Why do you think that? Why do you, the writer of the game, think that Freya wanted to die?
To me, there's probably a little bit of punishment, that we all put ourselves through, but that decision was a decision truly of a parent. It was the idea that I would put my life in front of behind my child's.
Mm-hmm.
That if there was a choice, that I would lay my life down for my kid,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that is the decision she's making, and that she is not saying in that moment that I deserve this. She's saying, if you can never forgive me, if this is the only way that this can get resolved, I cast this spell on you because you are going to be the thing that lived on. Mm-hmm. You're the lasting magic, right? You're the thing, the legacy that I carry on. And if it means I need to die, then I will die, right? Not because...
It's interesting that Kratos took away that choice, like Kirk mentioned. I think that's an interesting and not so not an okay thing for Kratos to do. And
right,
in my
he took that choice
case.
away, and then he has to suffer the consequences, right? That he's saying, now I have to evaluate: does my son see this and see terrible behavior modeled, or do I make an enemy of somebody who's been nothing but nice to us, right? Mm-hmm. And is he making the right choice? Like, nobody really knows the choices they make, or whether or not they're right or wrong. It's the consequences that help us understand whether or not it was right or wrong.
Hey, I'm Melissa Kirsch, Editor-in-Chief of Lifehacker.
And I'm Alice Bradley, Lifehacker's Deputy Editor.
And we're the hosts of Lifehacker's podcast, The Upgrade. On The Upgrade, we help you improve your life 1 week at a time. We talk to guests like former hacker Hector Monsegur about online security.
You need to be aware of how you could be attacked. You need to be aware of what's your weakness.
And Alan Alda on how to communicate more effectively.
And in order to achieve that, we start with teaching exercises derived from improvisation.
And sex therapist Steven Snyder about how to have great sex in a long-term relationship.
What really works under those circumstances is if you enjoy the other person selfishly.
Hey, your life? It's terrible. We can help.
Find The Upgrade wherever you get your podcasts.
So, yeah, I mean, something that we have to talk about is what all the little threads that you've set up for future stuff. Because we were talking before about you have a 5-game plan in your head. Do you, like...
But to be clear, the 5-game plan is I wanted to
I'm
put
not
things
saying
in
you're
this.
announcing 4 more games here.
Good.
I'm just saying, like...
No announcement here.
Do you envision, like what kind of arc do you envision? Do you envision, is the game going to get some DLC that, like, finishes this particular story and then we move on to another story? Are we going to have to wait for the next God of War in order to see the resolution of Thor showing up to their house? Like what kind of game plan do we have in mind here?
For me, I made this game to be that you bought it and you went home and you played it and you got the whole game, right? There was not a plan at all in any of this that I was going to deliver any DLC or anything like that, simply because I loved, as a kid, to get a game and play the whole game and feel like I got everything, right? It didn't mean...
your final scene has got Thor standing outside of the door with his hammer. I mean...
Got the Marvel post-credit scene in there.
But I mean, come on, if you play God of War 2, you know that I'm not going to end it with, everything's done, and then you don't ever have to play another game.
Sure.
I love the sort of Lord of the Rings concept of when you finish Fellowship, you're getting ushered into Two Towers, right?
Sure.
And I think for me that is a continued engagement. There is the end of the credits scene that teases something, right? And I don't think anybody watches any of the sort of Marvel movies and goes like, "Man, you ripped me off. You put this credit scene at the end, and when are you going to finish it?" Like, obviously you're going to finish it in the next movie.
Sure.
And I think this is the same. That this is all building towards this sort of grand story. And for me, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of DLC simply because sometimes it is approached in the manner of, okay, well, here's the game. Let me just cut this part off and then that'll be DLC. Mm-hmm. Also, I need a rest, man. 5 years. Like, I don't want to jump into DLC right now. I want to kind of, if we're going to go on to another one, and start prepping for that so that it has an impact. You know, I feel like the beginning of 3 was strong because of that strong ending that basically was Kratos riding Gaia up the side of Olympus saying, your son has returned, right?
As long as you don't have to wait another 5 years for the next one.
I hope not.
So I have another question sort of tangentially related to that. There is a scene, I believe in Tyr's vault, where you find you know, the symbols of these various gods, and one of them is the Egyptian symbol, which a lot of people will know from having played Assassin's Creed Origins.
Yeah.
Is there anything to that? Are there other pantheons in this universe that Kratos might go explore?
Oh, totally. Like, I've always looked at this universe as, you know, like our world, right? It is the geography separates the cultural mythologies, right? The cultural mythologies are stories of the 0 point to present day. These are the birth and the origin of these cultures, so that Norse mythology exists in Scandinavia, and simultaneously across the world, the Mayan mythology has its origins, right? These are cultural stories about how they explain the sort of birth of their cultures. And I think, as I look at the whole world, that each of these gods had their own domains, right? The same way that countries have their own domains and their own leaders,
special fighting moves, and their own special sweet
and
weapons,
their own special fighting moves, and their own
upgrade
DLC.
trees.
Right. But yeah, like it is a consistent single universe. I think that as we start to look at these things, there's little bits here and there that let you know, like Tyr had connections to a lot of other pantheons. And there is references in Norse mythology of gods interacting with Roman gods, right? It's very small, it's very minimal in their sort of connections, but it shows that there was an awareness. And whether that awareness was like post, where there was the time where they were kind of moving the pagans away from the pagan religion by having the sort of mythology slightly modified to kind of move towards Christian religion. So I think it is fascinating to imagine that at all times there is these connections to every one of these locations.
We've been joking about this a lot, imagining Kratos going and like fighting a bunch of gods in different religions. A lot of these feel sort of safe to explore in the West, which is dominated by Christianity. Is there a world in which Kratos goes and like explores the Christian pantheon and like fights Samson and fights Jesus and stuff? Could that ever happen?
That's a good question.
Like, I mean, I am looking at every aspect. There was a point in the early part of the project that I was imagining what would God of War be like in modern day.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and then it's interesting. It's a great thought experiment to kind of start seeing
Kratos takes on Scientology, takes on mega churches,
or like
and
he's
tears
like
them
the
down.
head of a corporation, right? And everything's like boardroom battles and stuff like that. Like, I don't know. Like, there's possibilities for everything. And, you know,
Kratos takes on Monsanto.
Right.
There's like a negotiating mini game with like quick time events where he has to make
contract
the right
law
bid for it.
Like, yeah, it's fantastic.
He has to go and get the blades, and then he
Right.
just takes them and cuts up this paperwork. this dramatic scene. So you've said in the past also that you guys have hidden things in the game that you're hoping it takes years to find, or like
Yes.
the things that people will take forever to discover. I just saw today there was a story that people found the hidden treasure where you just look between braziers, and it was like included on the treasure map. That
this
came
was
with
super
one of
cool.
the collector's edition.
What?
Yeah, people.
Someone
found
found that already?
Yeah.
Man.
Is that the thing that took years that you thought we're hoping would take years?
I don't know if that was the one that's.
Is there stuff in the game still that people haven't found?
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, totally. There's a bunch. But
What-
that one,
Can you
I
give us
was
some hints?
no.
Wait, I have a question about one thing. How come some of the realms are clearly highlighted in the Tree of Life, and yet I can't go to them?
Right. Okay. So
Like, why can't I go to Asgard, man? I wanna go to
right,
Asgard.
because that's going to happen
That's
later.
God of
right?
War 2.
Right?
Okay,
You gotta
but I
say
mean, it's
something.
in this
Here's
game.
The thing. The
It's
conflict
sitting
between
there.
all this is there are 9 realms, right? The Midgard being sort of the base home mid-realm, and then the additional 8 realms. And it's very hard, I think, to do the visualization of it without at least acknowledging the other realms.
Okay.
But we really never planned on going to any of those. That was part of the continuation of the story. But you know, we did struggle with figuring out how to indicate to people, because it was weird when they weren't included, because then people kept
Right.
asking, I thought there were
Yeah,
9. Why is
yeah.
there blank spots here?
Where's
That
And
doesn't
like
make
you got that
sense.
UI prompt, right? It says this will never be accessible,
Right,
and I
right.
read that
And-
as pretty final. But even so, it's still
and
there.
that's good,
And,
because
You
know,
should
we
have
took a
said this
while
will be
to get
accessible
there.
in the sequel.
Right. I mean, honestly, we had played around with tons of different languages trying to figure out how do we get people to understand this is not going to be there, because
Yeah.
taking it away didn't work, and then the different wording was very difficult, and a lot of people kept, I'm getting the DLC vibes, and you're going to make me pay extra for this. And it's just like, all right, well, I just don't. The difficulty is the game is so big, even if we wanted to, we would have never been able to realize those realms the way we wanted to.
Yeah.
Like, they would have just always been like quick things there. So I figured, you know what, if we're going to take some lumps, we'll take some lumps on the idea that, Odin, this sort of omnipresent force, has locked it out and you're never going to get in there. That one seemed to be the most effective for people to at least go like, oh, okay, I get it, but still thinking you're going to make me pay for it.
Yeah, right. It's hard not to come away with that.
The other big thing is that this game, unlike previous God of War games, doesn't have a ton of huge set-piece bosses. There's Baldur, and then there's the cool, insane dragon fight. But other than that, there aren't these
the final
hulking,
fight.
The giant,
Baldur,
I think,
and Baldur again with the giant. Yeah. But so, like, I was expecting when I got to the end of the game, I was expecting like a big siege of Asgard and Thor and Odin to come out. But obviously, they wouldn't have made sense with the story. But still, were there conversations you guys had about like not enough bosses? Hey, do we need more of these like hulking creatures and monstrosities?
A little bit, but not really. I think the important thing is if you look back at God of War 1, like you see, this is sort of our starting in a new realm. It was not until 3, and it's unfortunate that I think people carry over like, well, 3 set the standard and you just got to repeat that over and over again. And it's like, it's not really true, right? One of the early conversations I had with people was, we cannot just make this a God-killing checklist, right? I think that would just be, it would do a disservice to telling, I think, a good story and an engaging sort of game if all you did was just there and check them off. It is too much of a good thing, makes you not appreciate it. A lot of people said, oh, there's not enough blood in the game. But when blood happens, it seems to have a more visceral effect, right? Because we learned from the previous game to say, you can't just keep overdoing it, right? You have to have a good sense of pacing to ensure while you're playing, there isn't that sense of, oh, there are not enough bosses. It is the retrospect where you look back at it and go, where do I find the fault in this? Oh, there's not enough bosses because look at God of War 3. There's 4,000 bosses, right? Yes, very true. But when you look at the interactions that you have with each one of these, like these bosses were like a year to a year and a half of development each, right? And that the spectacle was paid off, one, in the scale of the world. Like you have the World Serpent coming out and dropping that central hub multiple times. To me, that is a big spectacle. Sometimes people don't look at that because they're going, no, I want only bosses. Tell me the bosses, right? Which is great. It is definitely things that we love to do, but they had to be impactful. They had to be the bosses that were memorable well, thank God we got 15 in there, right? Like I think we never wanted to get caught up in sort of we have to hit a certain
the checklist
number.
we were talking about
Right,
before.
right. Because it's something that as gamers, we were not a fan of feeling like, all right, well, you just keep throwing them in there. It's like when people say, why are there not enough weapons, right? But when you play it, do you really feel like if I had 15 more weapons that were super shallow, this game would be so much more fun? Or this weapon feels like you put a lot of time in it.
It's meaningful. By the way, when you guys make a sequel and you call it God of War 2, it's just going to be a disaster. It's going to be like, oh, God of War 2. Wait, which God of War 2?
Right.
Which God of War?
Yeah.
How are you going to deal with that?
It's going to be God of War TOO, like TOO2, with Kratos on the cover making the DreamWorks face.
Yeah,
TOO. Well, like Banjo-Tooie, right? Yeah, it's perfect.
God of War 2?
Yeah, God of War 2.
No, seriously, how are you going to deal with that problem? Because like, look at Star Wars Battlefront and Battlefront 2, and now there are 2 games called Battlefront 2. It's ridiculous.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't find it. That one I don't remember, Battlefront 2.
Yeah, there's Star Wars Battlefront 2 and Star Wars Battlefront 2.
But yeah, you're right. There is. But I never really thought about that.
How do you solve a problem like that when you reboot the series?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, for me, it was super intentional to not put a subtitle or a number, right? I think there's a lot of baggage that comes with when you put 4 at the end of that. One is, as a consumer of content, if I saw a 4, I would not be able to stop my compulsion to want to go back and like play the first 3. It would be like starting a television series on episode 18. I just wouldn't do it, right? Like I'd want to go back there. And this game could be consumed without ever playing a God of War, or by playing all of the God of Wars, or playing one God of War. And I needed people right from the start to understand that's what this was. I needed them to see that we were starting over, but we were respecting the chronology, right? So that you saw that it was still Kratos. You're wondering, okay, is this the same Kratos? We had a lot of discussion, I think, with the audience to ensure that we were still doing that. The people were understanding that. Now, what we do on the next, I don't know. Like, you're right. Maybe it is a bridge too far if you go God of War 2, but
maybe you go to God of War 5.
We could go.
Maybe you pull a Microsoft and you go to God of War 1.
X.
Yeah.
We'll just put it.
God of War 1.
God of War Homecoming. I think you just call it God of War Homecoming.
It's like Final Fantasy.
That works. Yeah, exactly. Speaking of Final Fantasy.
I'm going to have the longest subtitle in the history of subtitles. Like Radiant Mythology of, I don't know.
Okay, so on that note, we have to have a a quick interlude to talk about JRPGs
Okay.
because Split Screen is very pro JRPG podcast, and
Which
you
is
are
awesome.
You are a fan of Suikoden,
Yeah.
Trails in the Sky, Trails of Cold Steel, like all of my favorite
Brave
things.
Story, Yiz.
So, what's the best JRPG you've played over the past 5 years, and how has it influenced God of War?
Oh, wow. Okay. Look, I am slowly chipping my way through Persona 4,
Okay.
a game that continues to blow my mind when I consume it in small chunks.
This explains why Kratos dates everybody in
Right.
God of War.
And, well, is looking for a job after school,
Right.
Looking for after-school activities.
Right.
Like, there's actually a lot of parallels in there. I gotta be honest, I can't say if whether there is a conscious influence of that, but there is a sense of place in Persona 4. The sense of really being part of this community, right? That it isn't just about going to school. It is about going and meeting people at the store and, having food and then going into the TV and then going back home and hanging out with your family. Like, there's a lot of, I think, levels of detail for the sense of place. So it's not just when you talk about graphical fidelity. This is more of like, actually placing you in this world fidelity that for me was very, very important in God of War. That it felt like when you were in this world, it felt immediate and it felt intimate, but it also felt real and connected, right? Which led to the controversy of like the map of saying, why isn't the map 1-to-1, right? And it's like, because I want you to be in the world. I want you to look around. I want you to see that landmark. Oh yeah, okay, this is where it's near the wrecked boat. Not, oh, I'm going to that grid point on the map, right? One, it places you in the time period where they did not have Google Maps, right? So nothing was as exacting as some of the modern day maps, but also, it let you embrace just walking around and observing the world and actually feeling connected to it.
Yeah, so you are a Suikoden fan, correct?
Yes.
And God of War, I think, has a couple of parallels with Suikoden too.
Jason says this about every game.
In
I'm just going to
terms of
interject
how-
here
So
that Jason
break it
says
down.
that every game is like Suikoden in some way or another.
Wait. Hear me out. Hear me out.
Okay, well, of course we'll hear you out. It's your podcast.
I
too.
think Suikoden 2 is very good at telling a very personal story, even among this grander scale of like war and destruction and betrayal.
Yeah.
And it's all about that personal
Much more
story
complicated,
despite
yes.
that. And I think God of War, very similarly, I think you can see parallels between Kratos and Baldur and Joey and Ryu in Suikoden 2. So there you go. Boom.
Boom.
I
You
did
just
it.
dropped the mic on
I was
that
waiting for
one.
Jason to just be like, Suikoden 2 is a very good game, and God of War is also a very good game, and I feel
Also,
like
in
they
God of
really
War,
have
you
that
can
in common.
you can collect so many different things that I feel like it's just a collectathon of just like Suikoden 2.
There was, okay, so that's a pretty good point of like my sort of love of that connection to games is feeling like, not collection for collection's sake, but a feeling that you have so much to do and that each thing can give you a reward on a different level. Whether the reward is simply, I get to go to Brock's shop and I get to see that stuff displayed on the shelves. Or that reward is, I am saving up for something that might be further off in the distance. And I spent so much time in a lot of different RPGs of having that long-term goal and that short-term goal. And I don't know. I think that is a great influence on early gaming that we've tried to take forward. And so if you say Suikoden 2 is a good game and God of War is a good game, I will say amen, brother.
Yeah, Suikoden 2 is a little bit lower on Metacritic, but that's because Metacritic is just bullshit. Oh yeah, quick question. Why do all PS4 games have amazing snow? Is everybody sharing notes on snow? It seems like every single PlayStation 4 game just has perfectly crunchy snow.
That's interesting. No, I mean, honestly, I feel like there's a point of pride with different programmers at different studios that want to make really good snow because the snow tech...
Are they just all competing? Is there like a secret
I
snowathon
think-
that we don't know
I
about?
feel like there's like a secret society.
Yeah,
right?
just
There
Snow
might be
Grid
like a
Alliance.
Slack room, like a snow Slack, because the snow in
Right.
Horizon and the snow in Uncharted 4 and the
Yeah.
snow in God of War, it's like similarly amazing across all
Yeah.
three games to the point where I think a lot of people are thinking, oh, those Sony studios, they all
Right.
share snow tech or something. You're saying
But
that's not the case.
I don't think we are. I mean, maybe they are, and the programmers aren't telling me. But the snow that we had in this game, Florian Strauss, the graphics programmer or sort of technical director on the game, had been working out this idea earlier on, like the midway point of the game, and I had caught a glimpse of it on a flat gray plane on one of the effects artist's desk, and I kind of just stopped and looked at it. And I said, "What is that?" And he was like, "Oh, he's not ready. He's not ready to show this off yet." And for him, he was like, it was an experiment, and I was like, "I want this everywhere. This is amazing. We need." He's like, "It's not ready yet. We need to look into this." And I just went ballistic and loved it because he was doing something that allowed you could throw a character on the ground and the actual body outline of the character would be indented or imprinted in the snow. And he had these great little like particles, chunks of snow that were popping out. I was blown away by it. And he was, as he typically is, like underselling everything, right? He's always, "Oh, no, it's not ready for prime time." But I just push and push and push. So perhaps he was comparing notes with other studios, but I kind of think it is just this sort of pet project.
Everyone just wants to do it.
Yeah, because like Horizon, their snow came after ours. That was the Frozen Wilds. They really kind of came down, and we were just
they
like,
saw you guys, and they were like, "We got to beat them with snow."
Well, we saw theirs, and we were amazed.
So this makes for a good segue into a more serious topic, which is, so I heard you talking to Brad Shoemaker of Giant Bomb about labor in video games and crunch and passion and all that good stuff. Yeah. I have written extensively about this sort of thing, and I'm pretty passionate about talking about it.
Why are you passionate about talking about it?
Well, because
what about it?
I think that it's something that is hurting the video game industry. It has been for a long time. Yeah. The idea of, something that I think that I wanted to ask you about is this idea that it's the idea of, hey, we don't have mandatory crunch, but everybody is so passionate about the game and cares so much about putting the best work into it that they all stay late because they all want to, and they all put in all this time because they want to. And to me, that's always been the most like insidious type of crunch, is that voluntary kind. And I'm curious, as a manager, like, do you feel responsible for telling people, no, don't do that? Or do you feel like that's something that you could or should do?
I don't know. I look at it as a sort of an entertainment industry-wide thing, right? And I mean all aspects of entertainment, because when we put something out there, and I think even what you guys do is the same thing. You're putting entertainment out there or information out there to be judged, right? To be sort of consumed by people, but also you sort of live and die by the sword of the audience, right? So that when you put something out there that you don't feel like you gave everything you could, the audience recognizes that, and you are judged by that, right? And I think it is a hard thing. I've worked in film, I've worked in games, and in both of these industries is the exact same thing, is that the people who are cognizant or aware that you are going to be judged by this. So is your best foot forward?
Well, right? In film, there's a big difference in film, which is that they are all unionized and they have protections that workers in the video game industry don't have. When people in film work overtime, they are almost always paid for that overtime. In video games, it's more passion leads to voluntary labor.
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult thing, right? Because I think a lot of people, when I worked at Sony for the first time back in 2003, when I first came back, that moment I had where, 25, 30 people were sitting around a build station at 3 a.m, and Shannon Studsill, the lead producer, was there as well, and we're all just waiting for a disc to be burned, right? And nobody needed to be there, right? Like no one was being asked to be there, but we were waiting for the disc to be burned because this was the first TGS showing of the game, and we had a lot to prove, right? Because prior to that, there was a game that had been canceled, and really Sony Santa Monica had been known for Kinetica, and that was it. Right, so God of War or Dark Odyssey at the time was the code name, was the thing that we were going to be recognized for. And I think that sort of collective passion for it, and it's like, I don't know, I don't look at it as insidious when you have a lot of people who are actually like, I really want to do this.
I mean, if it's like a special event where it's like, I mean, like when it's E3 time, we're all working overtime, we're all putting in tons of extra hours. But I think in the video game industry, it is not a special event. It's every time there's a milestone. It's every time you're in the last stretch, the last sprint of release. It's like months and months on end of, hey, sometimes we're crunching every other day. Hey, we're working Saturdays. And I think that is where it gets a little out of control.
Yeah, I mean, it is not an easy thing to create something, right? It is not a certainty. It is not a path in which everybody can say, this is exactly how it's done. And if you just do A, B, and C, you'll be able to get it done one time, and it'll be perfect in the end. I mean, we throw things out. right? Like we do something in its entirety and then say that's not good enough. And we do that because the audience will judge otherwise, right? If you put out something that you say, that wasn't very good, but I don't want to do it again, right? And I feel like that all the time. Like there's so many times where you're like, I'm just so done with this. I can't do it again. But sort of that weird director, like sort of doubt comes in your head and you say like, is this the best that it can possibly be? Because again, we don't do something that exists in a vacuum. Like that's the most interesting part of all of this is that anybody who says I just make games for myself, like cool, awesome, you live in a very cool world because I don't make games for myself. Like I love to play the games that I make, but it's these things cost a lot of money.
Well,
right?
do you think it's impossible, or do you think it is possible to make a game like God of War, a great game, a game of the year type game without crunch?
I don't know. I think as you look around it, literally every great thing that was ever created, it was born of passion and drive, right? The story that sticks in my head the most, the one that sort of is formative for me as a director and as somebody who leads people, was James Cameron Goes to the Abyss. He had a very small window in which he could get Bill Paxton, the oceanographers, the sub, and the boat to get out to the Titanic, right? And actually be able to go and do the dive, right? And they arranged this for a while. It was like a year or two to set this thing up, and it takes like 2 days to get out there. So they have like a 6-day window to get all of this stuff done. They get out to the location after 2 days of travel to discover that the crane that lifts the sub up over the side of the boat and puts it in the water is broken. So 2 days of travel out there, they are alone on the boat. They're trying to fix it. It's late when they arrived at the site. Everyone's freaking out. And James Cameron just makes the executives say, you guys just have to go to sleep. We need to start this problem fresh in the morning, right? So James Cameron stayed up all night. He drew up engineering plans to use pulleys and ropes, and then sort of did a rough calculation, at least so I'm told, of how much it would cost to cut out the side of the boat, and said he's going to lift the sub just inches off the ground and then drag it over and then put it into the water. And the cost for, having to rebuild the boat and break all that stuff is cheaper than having to throw it all out and try to get everybody's schedule to align again a year later, right? So he literally did not sleep. Right. And then the same thing. They went right into shooting the next day and drove forward. Right. And that to me, as I look at it, going like, all right, you can easily say, you know what? We're defeated. We have to walk away from it. It just didn't work out. We'll come back. We'll try to figure it out later. Or you sort of have that drive inside. And I think that drive exists in so many of the great people that I've ever worked with that say it is not good enough, right? I have not successfully hit the mark of what we need to do. And that is usually born of re-examination, the thing that sort of drives you crazy and say, we didn't get it. So I don't know if it is one of those things that you can look at it as a holistic of saying, like, it's easy just to cross it all the industry. We should be able to do this without doing this, right? I just don't know if any one human could ever answer that, but it does require that sense of the very rare person, right? Like Clint Eastwood is a great example of the person who anybody who ever works on a movie with is always so fascinated because he very rarely does too many multiple takes. Right, like he usually gets it in 1 or 2 takes, and just knows exactly what he wants. Right, he's that rare breed of human that has the clearest picture in his head and knows exactly how to get to the goal line because of a lifetime doing this. Right, and I think for me, I have the presence of mind to know that I don't know, and that a lot of the creative process is feeling around in the dark for a light switch.
So the people that you're talking about, the James Camerons of the world, and even someone in your position, are also benefiting a lot from the process. I think it's a little bit different to say I'm going to go without sleep when you are receiving a lot of money and a lot of notoriety, a lot of fame, a lot of success from your project. And I think one of the things we're seeing, and this is not on your shoulders, this is a video game industry-wide problem, is that people who are expected to put in that passion are not receiving the benefits, and so a lot of them are leaving for other industries. A lot of people are leaving to do their own thing and actually reap the rewards from putting in all those hours, because it's a lot different when you're putting it in for yourself. And that is something that the reason that I care so much about it is because I look at companies' job listings and see all the openings for senior level people and the dearth of senior level talent, because all these people are burning out once they have families, once they have children, once they have little Atreuses of their own. And I worry about the effect that this is going to have in the video game industry long term. And I worry that games like God of War are not going to be possible in 10, 15 years because the industry is just so unhealthy and grinding through its workers.
Yeah.
Well, there is another question that I had for you, which is I'm curious about. We were talking before about your early scripts, your early drafts for the game, early versions that had Odin. Were there things that you had to cut along the way that you wish had actually made it into the game? Is there anything that you are sad to say goodbye to over the past 5 years?
It's interesting because yes and no. It's kind of this thing that, like, when I had to cut it, and this game. Maybe, going back to that first question, you said, what is the hardest part? I think the hardest part of this game, now that I'm really thinking about it, was the fact that in my experience in making any other games, there'd be a point where you'd have to start scoping the game down. So you'd have maybe 1, 2, 3 points in the duration of the game where you're like, all right, we have to rescope. This is taking longer, so we'll have to reevaluate this. I was scoping for 3 years. Like almost every single week, we were talking about some aspect of the game that was, okay, this is too much, this is too far, right? There was more bosses in the game. They had to go because, 1, there was some pacing issues in a few other areas, but 2, it was just, a year and a half.
What other bosses are in the game?
I'm not going to tell you because they might appear in somewhere else. So? But no way, man, not spoiling that one. But they were not gods. I can say that. So there was not any gods that were involved in the story.
JRPG villains?
They were maybe.
Was Sephiroth going to be in the game?
Oh my gosh. See, now you're totally spoiling it for everybody else. They know.
I want a God of War game that's like sort of like Kingdom Hearts, where you just go through and fight every Final Fantasy villain.
Oh, that'd be. And maybe Disney as well. So you mix it all together.
Sure.
I think we can make that happen. Put the MCU in there.
Well, they already have Thor.
Right. Right, and what about Thor? Their Thor versus our Thor? Right?
I want to see. So when you fight Thor in the game, is he going to be throwing his hammer and then calling it back, and then you're going to be throwing your hammer at him and calling it back?
Well, you have an axe, but
that's
yeah. You know what? You'll have to wait and see. I can guarantee you this: our Thor is very different from anybody else's Thor. Very
interesting.
Very different.
So you have him planned out already. You know what you're going to do with him.
Well, as much as one can say, I have something planned out before you really dig into it with a group of smart people. I think as much as I think I'm super smart, the reality is I'm only smart because I have very, very smart people around me that challenge every single choice to try to make it the best.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that you're going to be able to avoid those pre-production problems that you ran into last time for the next project because you have so much stuff established?
I think I'll be able to avoid those specific ones, but I think the creative process is messy, right? It's difficult and it's surprising, but it's surprising in such a good way. Like, that's the good thing, is that no matter how smart you think you are and how well you have it planned, there's always going to be that wild card idea from the person in the back of the room who looks at things just so differently than you do, that goes, if you're open to it, you find something magical. You say, oh, wait, what did you do? Let's talk about that, right? That moment is why I do this, right? Why I push through a lot of these things is finding something that is so unexpected that you go, oh, I wish I would have thought of that. I mean, the Atreus being Loki was Matt Sophos and Rich Gobert's brainstorm on the way to work. And they came in and pitched it to me. And I was like, oh, that's amazing, right? Because what it did is it exploded so many possibilities of the thing that was missing. That we had this core story, that we had this journey of the father-son, but when that was introduced, all of a sudden, like fireworks, all these amazing connections that I wanted to put in, but wasn't really figuring out the right way to sort of leverage them, just started illuminating, all over and I'm like, oh, this, and then that, and oh, this is amazing. I think there's so many things we can do. And a bunch of that stuff wasn't even in this game. It was like, and this is where this can go. Oh, this is amazing. I think this is fantastic. And it comes from, they just look at things differently.
Yeah. I like that it's tied to the little throwaway joke that Atreus makes about being able to turn into animals. And then it's like, oh, yeah, he's Loki. Wait a minute.
But that was put in because I didn't want any twist to ever not have a setup.
Right.
Like the Blades of Chaos were shown in the first sequence. So
were they shown? Are they actually shown?
Yeah.
Because I know that he says, like, I'm not supposed to go down there.
He told me to never go down there.
Right.
And then when they're going off at the beginning of the journey, and he says, you're not ready, but prove it. Prove me wrong. We actually have him closing the floor, and we pan the camera down and hold for about 15, 20 frames, and then continue on so that we are indicating, and you can make out just a little bit of the fabric and a little bit of the gold design. At one point, the blades were actually glowing, and it was super obvious, so we had to remove that. But yeah, it was everything. Like, there is not a single reveal or twist that is there that doesn't have a clear thing. I mean, some of them are super obvious, really obvious, and when people find them, they're gonna be like, how did I miss that?
When people play it again, it's even made even more remarkable by the fact that the camera does not cut from Kratos, which is interesting. Which is also another interesting thing that you've talked about at end, but the fact that you're able to hide things and keep things. One thing I found interesting is that it seems like it would be tough to actually keep perspective when things like the world serpent is draining the water. It's actually, it would be way easier to tell what was going on if you were able to zoom out and say, oh, now this is what's happening. So you guys had to do some interesting things with the camera there.
That point was brought up many times. Why can't we just zoom out? Why can't we just pull out to a wider shot? I'm just like, we can appreciate amazing, massive things in our real world without ever having a crane camera behind us to give us a perspective of that. We can go to the Grand
that was
Canyon.
the right call. There are definitely times when you're going around the lake after it's raining, you kind of realize, it took me a while to realize, oh, wait a minute, holy shit, all these things are now accessible because this has happened. But that was sort of more fun than having seen it, Zelda style. The Zelda chime plays and the lake drains one more level.
Yeah, why weren't there any Zelda chimes in this game?
Nobody wanted it. I was putting them in all over the place, and they were like, "You gotta stop doing that." And I just do it like a cappella every once in a while.
Yeah,
and people are like, "Stop that."
All right, Corey. I think this is a good note to end on, so people can, of course, find your game on store shelves everywhere.
Right.
God of War.
I think we have it in a few stores.
A little thing you might have seen it a couple of places here and there. I saw it in France last week. So
you did?
Shout out! Yeah, I saw it in there's a store in Paris that has like 10 different video game stores all next to each other. So I was checking them all out, and pretty much all of them had God of War.
Oh, that's so cool.
Shout out to Paris.
Fantastic.
And people can find, where else can people find you?
On Twitter, at Corey Barlog.
And they can email you at... no, I'm just kidding.
Jason.Schreier@kotaku.com.
Exactly. By the way, for what it's worth, I think the topic of crunch is a nuanced issue, and maybe one day we'll get to talk about it more, but not right now because I'm getting some nasty looks in here. All right, Kirk, we will see you next time. Corey, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, sir. This is wonderful.
Yeah, thanks so much, Corey.
See you around.
All right, guys.
Kotaku Split Screen is an official podcast of Kotaku.com. It's produced by Jason Schreier and me, Kirk Hamilton. I edit and mix the podcast and also wrote and performed our theme song and other music. We're part of the Fusion Podcast Network, where Mandana Mofidi is executive producer of audio. You can find us on popular podcast services like Panoply, NPR Now, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts, and we hope that you'll leave us a review if you like what you hear. Find old episodes at kotaku.com/splitscreen. Email us at splitscreen@kotaku.com.